The soft glow of candles barely penetrated the thick fog that seemed to have seeped through every crack and crevice of Elderwick Manor. Amidst the shadows of her bedchamber, Eliza Blackwood sat rigidly at her dressing table as her lady's maid, Martha, wove dark red roses into her ebony hair. The blooms were the colour of blood against her pale skin and raven locks. A fitting metaphor, Eliza thought bitterly, for what was to come. "Not too tight, Martha," Eliza whispered, her breath fogging the mirror before her. "I can scarcely breathe as it is." "Forgive me, Miss Eliza," the maid murmured, loosening a strand. "Your father instructed that you look your finest tonight. Lord Wintervale and his son will be arriving within the hour." Eliza caught Martha's hesitation. No one in the household spoke directly of the Wintervale heir's condition. It was as if utterance of the word vampire might summon some terrible curse upon them all. Yet it was precisely this curse, or blessing, depending on who was asked, that made Cassius Wintervale such a desirable match in her father's eyes. "My father would sell my soul for a stronger position in Parliament," Eliza said, watching her reflection grow dimmer as the sky outside darkened completely. "And I suppose that's precisely what he's doing tonight." Martha's fingers stilled in her hair. "Miss, please don't speak so. Perhaps Lord Cassius will be kind. Kind. A vampire. Have you heard nothing of their kind, Martha? They take what they want and leave husks behind. I shall be nothing but a vessel, for blood, for heirs, for whatever else pleases him." Eliza touched the lace at her throat, imagining fangs piercing the flesh beneath. A knock at the door interrupted her dark musings. Her father entered without waiting for a response, his robust frame filling the doorway, eyes appraising her with the cold calculation of a merchant assessing goods. "Stand up, Eliza. Let me see you." She obeyed, rising from her seat and straightening her posture as she'd been taught since childhood. Her crimson gown, another of her father's choices, clung to her slender frame before cascading to the floor in waves of silk and lace. It was a beautiful prison. "You'll do," James Blackwood said, nodding curtly. "Remember what's at stake tonight. The Wintervales control 3 counties and have the ear of the Crown. With their support, my proposed legislation will pass without contest." "And what of my dreams, Father? My plans to study at the university? The manuscripts I've been working on?" His laugh was short, dismissive. "Women don't attend universities, Eliza. Those manuscripts are nothing but childish fantasies. This marriage is your purpose, to elevate our family name and secure our fortune. The Wintervales need fresh bloodlines, and we need their influence. It's an arrangement beneficial to both families. Beneficial to everyone but me," she whispered, but her father had already turned away. "The carriages have been spotted on the road. Finish her preparations and bring her down in 10 minutes, he instructed Martha before exiting, leaving behind the scent of brandy and cigar smoke. Eliza returned to her seat, meeting her own eyes in the mirror. At 22, she was considered almost beyond marriageable age in their society, a fact her father had mentioned with increasing frequency over the past year. Her refusal of 3 previous suitors had driven him to more desperate measures, culminating in this unholy arrangement. "Martha," she said softly, "have you ever seen him?" "Lord Cassius." The maid secured the final rose in Eliza's hair before answering. "Only once, miss, when I was a girl in the village. The Wintervales rarely leave their estate, but there was a terrible fire at the orphanage. They say Lord Cassius moved through the smoke as if it weren't there, carrying children out 2 at a time." Martha lowered her voice. "They also say none of those children remember how they escaped, and all had small wounds on their wrists that healed without scarring." Eliza's stomach tightened. "So he saved them only to feed from them?" "I cannot say, miss, but the children lived when they should have perished. Perhaps sometimes the means matter less than the end." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the hour, its sound echoing through the manor like a funeral toll. "It's time, Miss Eliza." With a final glance at her reflection, at the woman she would no longer be after tonight, Eliza followed Martha from the room. The corridor stretched before her, its dark wooden panels absorbing what little light the wall sconces provided. Portraits of Blackwood ancestors watched her descent with painted eyes that seemed to follow her movements, judging her reluctance. As she reached the grand staircase, voices drifted up from the entrance hall below. Her father's booming welcome, the deeper melodic response of what must be Lord Wintervale Sr., and then silence, where a third voice should have been. Eliza paused at the top of the stairs, her hand trembling against the banister. Through the ornate railings she could see 3 figures below, her father, resplendent in his finest coat, an elderly gentleman with silver hair and a walking stick, and a tall, lean silhouette standing slightly apart from the others, face obscured by shadow. Taking a deep breath, Eliza began her descent, each step feeling like a march toward execution. The conversation below halted as she emerged into view, 3 sets of eyes turning upward to watch her approach. "Ah, here she is," her father announced proudly. "Gentlemen, may I present my daughter, Eliza Blackwood." She reached the bottom step and curtsied deeply, keeping her eyes lowered as etiquette demanded. When she straightened, she allowed herself to look directly at her intended husband for the first time. Lord Cassius Wintervale was not what she had expected. Where she had imagined a grotesque, pale creature with blood-stained lips and cruel eyes, she found instead a man of startling beauty. Tall and elegantly proportioned, with sharp features softened by the most curious eyes she had ever seen, a deep violet that seemed to shift in the candlelight. His hair, black as midnight, was tied back from his face with a simple ribbon, revealing a strong jaw and unexpectedly gentle mouth. He wore no color, save for a single ruby pin at his cravat, as crimson as the roses in her hair. "Miss Blackwood," he said, and his voice was like dark velvet, low and rich. He bowed, a fluid motion of perfect grace. "Your beauty exceeds all accounts." When he straightened, his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something in that gaze, not the hunger she had feared, but a deep, searching quality, as if he were looking not at her but into her. "You honor us, Lord Cassius," she replied, the words feeling like ashes on her tongue. The elder Wintervale stepped forward, tapping his cane against the marble floor. "Come, let us not stand on ceremony. James has promised us a fine dinner, and I find myself quite famished after our journey." His eyes, the same unusual violet as his son's, but clouded with age, crinkled with amusement at some private joke. "Indeed, indeed," her father said eagerly. "The dining room is prepared. Shall we?" As they moved toward the dining room, Eliza found herself walking beside Cassius, his tall frame casting a long shadow that seemed to envelop her. His steps made no sound on the floor, while her slippers echoed softly. "You're trembling, Miss Blackwood," he observed quietly, for her ears alone. "Am I, my lord?" she responded, striving to keep her voice steady. "Perhaps it is merely the chill of the evening." "Perhaps," he conceded, though his tone suggested he believed otherwise. "Or perhaps it is the prospect of dining with monsters that sets your pulse racing so." Eliza's steps faltered. She had not expected such directness, nor the hint of what seemed almost like self-deprecation in his tone. "I would not presume to call my guests monsters, sir," she managed to reply. A smile touched his lips, revealing teeth that appeared perfectly normal. No fangs visible, at least for now. "How diplomatic of you. But fear not, Miss Blackwood. Despite what tales you may have heard, my father and I do not typically dine on young ladies. At least," and here his voice dropped lower still, "not at the dinner table." A shiver ran down her spine at his words, but before she could formulate a response, they had reached the dining room. Candelabras cast dancing light over the long table, set with the family's finest china and crystal. Servants stood at attention along the walls, faces carefully composed to show no reaction to their unusual guests. Dinner was an elaborate affair of 7 courses, though Eliza noticed that Lord Cassius merely toyed with his food, occasionally bringing a fork to his lips but consuming very little. His father, surprisingly, ate with robust appetite, complimenting the cook on each dish. Between courses, the conversation centered primarily on politics and business, her father's legislation, the Wintervale's vast holdings, the changing landscape of power in London. Eliza remained silent unless directly addressed, observing the strange dynamics at play. Her father, normally so domineering, deferred to the elder Wintervale with almost sycophantic eagerness. Lord Wintervale Sr. spoke genially enough, though his smiles never quite reached his eyes. And Cassius watched her. When the final plates were cleared, her father rose. "Lord Wintervale, perhaps you would enjoy a brandy in my study. We can discuss the final details of the arrangement." "An excellent suggestion," the older vampire agreed, rising with surprising agility. "Cassius, why don't you take this opportunity to become better acquainted with your bride-to-be, perhaps a turn about the gardens?" It wasn't truly a suggestion, Eliza realized. The fathers had orchestrated this moment of privacy, likely hoping the young couple would develop some rapport before the imminent wedding. "Miss Blackwood?" Cassius extended his hand toward her. "Would you do me the honor?" Finding no graceful way to refuse, Eliza placed her fingers lightly upon his. His skin was cool, but not the icy chill she had expected, more like marble that retained the memory of warmth. He led her through the French doors into the garden, where the fog had thinned somewhat to reveal a sky scattered with stars. The roses along the path released their heavy perfume into the night air, and somewhere distant, an owl called. "You may release my hand now, Miss Blackwood," Cassius said, after they were out of sight of the house. "I understand this is not a walk you undertake by choice." Surprised, Eliza withdrew her fingers from his grip. "You are very direct, my lord. I find that after centuries of existence, dissembling becomes tedious." He stopped beside a stone bench and gestured for her to sit. "Please," she complied, arranging her skirts as he remained standing, his tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. "You don't want this marriage," he stated simply. Eliza hesitated. Honesty could be dangerous with a creature such as him, but lies seemed pointless. "No, I do not. May I ask why? Is it my nature that repels you, or merely the arrangement itself?" "Both," she admitted. "I don't wish to marry anyone at present. I have other aspirations." "The university studies your father mentioned. The manuscripts." Eliza's head snapped up in surprise. "You heard that?" A small smile played at his lips. "Enhanced senses are among the few benefits of my condition. I heard your conversation upstairs quite clearly." Heat rushed to her face. "Then you also heard what I said about vampires taking what they want and leaving husks behind?" He finished for her, amusement evident in his tone. "Yes, I heard that too. A rather poetic, if grim, description." Embarrassment gave way to indignation. "You find my fear amusing, my lord." "Not your fear, Miss Blackwood, your candor. It's refreshing." He moved to sit beside her on the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. "Tell me about these manuscripts of yours." The sudden change of subject caught her off guard. "They're nothing that would interest you." "Let me be the judge of that." Something in his gaze, a genuine curiosity, loosened her tongue. "They're historical accounts, primarily, examinations of overlooked figures in history, women whose contributions were erased or diminished. I've been researching in my father's library for years, piecing together their stories from footnotes and correspondence." "And the university?" "Cambridge has a women's college now. If I could attend, I could access archives beyond my father's limited collection. I could publish my work, perhaps even teach someday." As she spoke, passion crept into her voice despite her efforts to remain detached. "But it's impossible now, because of our impending marriage," Cassius stated. "Yes." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of night insects and the distant murmur of the fountain at the garden's center. "What if it weren't impossible?" he finally asked. Eliza turned to look at him directly. "I don't understand." Marriage to me would not necessarily preclude academic pursuits. The Wintervale Library is considerably more extensive than your father's, and I have connections at several universities. Hope flickered briefly before Eliza extinguished it. My lord, you speak as if this would be a normal marriage, but we both know what your kind requires of a bride. Cassius's expression darkened. And what do you believe that to be? Blood, she whispered. Heirs, submission. Two of those are accurate, he acknowledged, his voice cool, though perhaps not in the way you imagine. Before she could respond, he rose abruptly, moving several paces away. With his back to her, he spoke again. Our families have constructed this arrangement for mutual benefit. Your father gains political power. Mine secures new bloodlines to strengthen future generations. Neither has considered what you or I might want. And what do you want, Lord Cassius? Eliza asked softly. He turned back to her, his violet eyes gleaming in the darkness. Freedom, Miss Blackwood. The same as you. The admission hung in the air between them, unexpected and transformative. For the first time, Eliza saw him not as a monster or a reluctant obligation, but as a possible ally. Our situations are not entirely dissimilar, he continued. I have existed for 2 centuries under my father's control, bound by traditions and expectations I had no hand in creating. This marriage is but the latest in a long line of duties I'm expected to fulfill without question. You speak as if you too are being forced into this union. Force takes many forms, Miss Blackwood. Not all chains are visible. His gaze drifted toward the manor house, where light still burned in her father's study. But perhaps we might find a way to turn this situation to our advantage. Eliza stood, drawn closer to him by curiosity. What are you suggesting? An alliance of convenience that benefits us rather than our fathers. A marriage in name, but with terms of our own making. His voice lowered to a whisper, though they were alone in the garden. I could provide you access to education, to archives, to publication. In return, you would need blood, she finished for him, her hand unconsciously rising to her throat. Yes, but taken with care, with respect. Never more than you could safely give. His eyes held hers steadily, and never without your explicit consent. Eliza studied him, searching for deception in his otherworldly features and finding none. Why would you offer this? What do you gain beyond what the original arrangement already provided? A shadow crossed his face. There are political machinations at work beyond what your father understands. My father seeks this alliance not merely for bloodlines, but for power. Power I have no wish to help him obtain. You would defy your father. The concept seemed almost unthinkable to Eliza, raised as she had been in absolute obedience. I have been quietly defying him for decades, Cassius replied with a mirthless smile, but this time I need a partner. The night air suddenly felt electric around them, possibilities crystallizing where before there had been only resignation. Still, caution tempered Eliza's burgeoning hope. How can I trust you? She asked. Your kind are known for their powers of persuasion, their ability to enchant the mind. A valid concern. He considered for a moment before removing the ruby pin from his cravat. Holding it out to her on his palm, he explained, This stone has been in my possession for over a century. It contains certain properties. While you wear it, I cannot influence your thoughts, nor can any of my kind. Eliza stared at the gleaming stone. And I'm simply to believe that. You can research it yourself if we proceed. The Wintervale Library contains extensive information on such talismans. He closed his fingers around the pin. For now, consider it a gesture of good faith. From the house came the sound of voices, their fathers returning from their discussion. Their time alone was ending. I need your answer, Miss Blackwood, Cassius said urgently. Will you enter into this alliance with me? Marriage on our terms, not theirs? Eliza's mind raced. This vampire, this stranger, was offering her a path to her dreams. At a price, yes, but perhaps a price she could bear. The alternative was certain imprisonment in a conventional marriage to whatever human suitor her father chose next. If I agree, she said, her voice barely audible, what happens next? We proceed with the wedding as planned, but afterward we begin implementing our true arrangement. His eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like excitement. Starting with your enrollment at Cambridge. The voices grew louder, approaching the garden. Decision time had arrived. "Very well, Lord Cassius," Eliza said, straightening her shoulders. "I accept your proposal within a proposal." He nodded once, sharply, then stepped away from her just as the French doors opened, spilling light onto the garden path. Their fathers emerged, both looking pleased with themselves. "Ah, there you are," James Blackwood called. "I trust you've had a pleasant conversation." "Most illuminating, father," Eliza replied, avoiding Cassius's gaze. "Lord Cassius has been sharing fascinating insights about the Wintervale estate." "Excellent, excellent," her father beamed. "Then you'll be pleased to hear that all is settled. The wedding will take place 3 days hence at the Wintervale Castle." "So soon?" Eliza couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "No reason to delay," Lord Wintervale Sr. interjected smoothly. "The autumn moon is auspicious for such unions in our family tradition." As the elder men discussed logistics, Cassius moved subtly closer to Eliza. 3 days, he murmured, "and then our real work begins." She gave a nearly imperceptible nod, her mind already racing ahead to what this unholy alliance might bring. Freedom beckoned tantalizingly, but as she caught the calculating look that passed between their fathers, a chill premonition swept through her. She had just made a deal with a vampire, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the true monsters in this arrangement might be the mortal men who had orchestrated it all. Part 2. As dawn crept over the horizon 3 days later, Eliza stood at her bedroom window, watching servants load trunks into the waiting carriages. The Wintervale Castle awaited, her future prison or her salvation. She still wasn't certain which. "The white gown, Miss Eliza?" Martha asked, holding up the wedding dress her father had commissioned months ago, as if he'd always known this day would come. "Yes," Eliza replied distantly, "though it seems a mockery to wear white to such a ceremony." Martha's face creased with concern as she laid out the garment. "You've been different since that night in the garden. Did Lord Cassius, did he do something to you?" Eliza turned from the window. "He made me an offer, Martha. Not the one our fathers arranged, but one of his own." "Miss!" Martha gasped. "You mustn't speak of such things." "Not that kind of offer," Eliza clarified, though she couldn't help but smile at the maid's scandalized expression. "A partnership. He has promised me education, access to libraries and archives, the chance to publish my work." Martha's eyes widened further, and in exchange, Eliza's hand unconsciously rose to her throat. "What you'd expect." "Oh, Miss Eliza," Martha whispered, "can you trust him? Vampires are deceivers by nature." "I don't know," Eliza admitted, sitting at her dressing table. "But what choice do I have? Father would only find another suitor, one who might demand far worse and offer nothing in return." Martha began brushing Eliza's long, dark hair, her movements gentle but troubled. "I've packed the items you requested. Your research notes, your mother's journals, and the small pistol from your father's study. You found silver bullets?" 3, Martha confirmed. "Though heaven help you if it comes to that." Eliza reached up to squeeze the maid's hand. "Thank you, Martha. I don't know what awaits me at Wintervale, but I'm glad to be prepared." "I've also sewn a small pocket inside your corset," Martha added, lowering her voice, though they were alone, "for the amulet Lord Cassius gave you." Eliza withdrew the ruby pin from her jewelry box, watching how it caught the morning light, sending blood-red reflections dancing across the walls. Cassius had pressed it into her palm just before departing, whispering instructions to keep it hidden until their wedding night. "It's warm," she murmured, clutching the stone, "like it has its own heartbeat." A sharp knock interrupted them. James Blackwood entered without waiting for a response, his expression taut with nervous excitement. "Are you nearly ready? The first carriage leaves within the hour." His gaze swept over her critically. "You look pale. Martha, fetch some rouge. My daughter must look vibrant today." "Yes, sir." Martha curtsied and hurried to retrieve the cosmetics. "Father," Eliza began cautiously, "what exactly will happen at the ceremony? Lord Wintervale mentioned traditions specific to their family." James Blackwood shifted uncomfortably. "Nothing for you to worry about. Simply follow instructions and perform your duty." "But surely I should know—" "Enough questions!" he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. "Forgive me, Eliza. I'm merely anxious that all goes well. The alliance with the Wintervales will elevate our family beyond my wildest aspirations. The Prime Minister himself has promised me a cabinet position once the marriage is formalized." Eliza stared at her father, realizing how little she truly knew him. "Is that why you arranged this? A cabinet position?" He laughed, a hollow sound. "My dear, you cannot fathom what's at stake. The Wintervales aren't merely wealthy or influential. They are kingmakers, puppet masters behind half the governments of Europe. Their blood magic has sustained empires." "Blood magic?" Eliza echoed, a new chill settling in her stomach. Her father waved dismissively. "Female fancies need not concern themselves with such matters. Just be a good wife, give Lord Cassius what he needs, and our family's position will be secure for generations." "And if I fail to please him?" Something cold flickered in her father's eyes. "Then pray he kills you quickly, daughter. Now finish your preparations. I'll not have tardiness ruin this alliance." He departed as abruptly as he'd arrived, leaving Eliza trembling. Martha returned, her face pale. "Did you hear?" Eliza whispered. Martha nodded, carefully applying rouge to Eliza's bloodless cheeks. "Blood magic," she murmured. "The village elders speak of such things in whispers. They say the Wintervales can bind souls, command loyalties through blood rituals." "Bind souls?" Eliza's heart raced. "Is that what this wedding truly is? Not a marriage, but a binding?" Martha's hands stilled. "I don't know, miss. But if that pin truly protects against their influence, as Lord Cassius claimed, then I must guard it with my life," Eliza finished. The journey to Wintervale Castle took nearly 6 hours, winding through mist-shrouded hills and dense forests that seemed to grow darker and more primeval with each passing mile. Eliza rode in the lead carriage with her father, while servants followed with her belongings. As they crested the final hill, Wintervale Castle came into view, a vast Gothic structure of black stone that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the afternoon sunlight. Towers spiraled upward like grasping fingers, and gargoyles perched on every cornice, their stone eyes following the approaching carriages. "Magnificent, isn't it?" her father remarked, oblivious to the dread pooling in Eliza's stomach. "Construction began in the 12th century. The Wintervales were nobility long before our family had even a minor title." The carriage passed through wrought-iron gates, tall enough to admit giants, and rolled up a long drive lined with ancient yew trees twisted into unnatural shapes. As they approached the main entrance, Eliza spotted figures lining the steps, servants dressed in deep purple livery, standing motionless as statues. "Father," she said suddenly, "does Lord Cassius have any siblings?" James Blackwood frowned. "No. He is the sole heir. Why do you ask?" "Simple curiosity," she replied, though her real question remained unspoken. If vampires lived for centuries, why had Cassius's father produced only one heir? The carriage halted before the grand entrance. A servant opened the door and extended a gloved hand to assist her descent. Up close, Eliza noticed his eyes had an unusual vacancy, as if something essential had been hollowed out. "Welcome to Wintervale, Miss Blackwood," he intoned. "His lordship awaits you in the great hall." Her father hustled her up the wide stone steps, past the expressionless servants, through massive oak doors carved with scenes of what appeared to be ancient battles, or perhaps hunts, with human figures fleeing before shadowy predators. The entrance hall soared 3 stories upward, illuminated by massive chandeliers holding hundreds of black candles. Tapestries depicting scenes from mythology covered the walls, though Eliza noticed with growing disquiet that all featured themes of sacrifice or transformation. Persephone's descent to the underworld, Actaeon torn apart by hounds, Arachne's metamorphosis. Lord Wintervale Sr. stood at the centre of the hall, leaning on his walking stick, his violet eyes gleaming with satisfaction as she approached. "Miss Blackwood," he said, bowing slightly, "you honour our ancient home with your youth and beauty. I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Quite comfortable, thank you," she replied, performing a perfect curtsy. "Your castle is impressive." A smile played at his lips. "We have dwelled here for nearly 8 centuries. The stones know us, as we know them." He gestured to a grand staircase. "Cassius is attending to final preparations for tonight's ceremony. My housekeeper will show you to your chambers, where you may rest and prepare yourself." A severe-looking woman materialized at Eliza's side. "This way, miss." "I'll see you at the ceremony, Eliza," her father said, already turning his attention back to Lord Wintervale. "Remember what we discussed." The housekeeper, who introduced herself as Mrs. Drake, led Eliza up the staircase and through a labyrinth of corridors. Unlike the vacant-eyed footman, Mrs. Drake seemed alert and intelligent, though she maintained a rigid formality. "These will be your quarters until the ceremony," she explained, opening a door to reveal a luxurious suite decorated in crimson and gold. "Afterward, you will move to the eastern wing with Lord Cassius." Eliza entered, noting with relief that Martha was already there, unpacking her belongings. "Thank you, Mrs. Drake. How long before the ceremony begins?" 3 hours, miss. The ritual must commence precisely at midnight." The housekeeper paused, then added in a lower tone, "I've taken the liberty of having a light meal prepared. I suggest you eat while you can." Before Eliza could question this curious advice, Mrs. Drake departed, closing the door with a heavy thud. 3 hours, Eliza murmured, moving to the window. Outside, twilight was already descending, turning the formal gardens below into a maze of shadows. "Martha, help me search these rooms. I want to know if we're being observed." Together they examined every corner, finding nothing obvious, though Eliza couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Martha began preparing her bath, adding scented oils to the steaming water. "Will you be needing the special pocket now, miss?" Martha asked discreetly. "Yes," Eliza decided. "I want the pin with me during the ceremony, whatever it may entail." As Martha helped her undress, Eliza noticed a small box on the dressing table that hadn't been there moments before. Wrapped in black silk ribbon, it bore no note or card. "Did you see who delivered this?" she asked, but Martha shook her head in confusion. Warily, Eliza untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside lay a single blood-red rose and a folded piece of parchment. She recognized Cassius's elegant handwriting immediately. "The ceremony is not what you believe. Trust nothing you see or hear tonight, save for this. When the chalice comes, accept it with your left hand. Drink only after I have spoken the 3rd verse. Wear the ruby where skin meets air. Courage, Eliza. By dawn, you will understand. See." She read it twice before passing it to Martha, whose face paled as she absorbed the cryptic message. "Where skin meets air? What can that mean?" the maid whispered. Eliza touched her throat, considering. A necklace would be too obvious, too easily removed during the ceremony. Her gaze fell on the rose. "My hair. Will weave the pin into my hair, hidden amongst the roses Father insisted I wear." After her bath, Martha dressed her in layers of silken undergarments, each more exquisite than the last, followed by the wedding gown itself, a masterpiece of white silk and Belgian lace, with a train that trailed behind her like a river of moonlight. "The corset is too tight," Eliza gasped as Martha laced her. "Forgive me, miss, but Mrs. Drake insisted on these measurements." Martha loosened the laces slightly. "There, breathe now." As Martha styled her hair, weaving in blood-red roses identical to the one from the mysterious box, Eliza carefully positioned the ruby pin deep within the elaborate coiffure, ensuring it touched her scalp while remaining concealed. A knock at the door announced Mrs. Drake's return. She entered carrying a black velvet cloak. "It is time, Miss Blackwood. The guests have assembled." "Guests?" Eliza hadn't expected a large ceremony. "Who? The ancients," Mrs. Drake replied cryptically. "They come to witness all Wintervale unions. This way, if you please." Eliza hugged Martha fiercely before following the housekeeper. The maid's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "God be with you, Miss Eliza." The corridors seemed to have rearranged themselves, twisting deeper into the castle's heart. They descended stairs Eliza was certain hadn't been there before, until finally reaching a set of ebony doors inlaid with silver symbols she couldn't decipher. "Beyond these doors is the ancient chapel," Mrs. Drake explained, draping the black cloak around Eliza's shoulders. "The hood must remain up until the moment of unveiling. Speak only when addressed directly, and make no sign of the cross." "I don't understand. There isn't time." Mrs. Drake's formal demeanor cracked momentarily, revealing something like pity in her eyes. "Remember this, in Wintervale blood speaks louder than words, but intent speaks louder than blood." Before Eliza could process this strange advice, the doors swung open silently. A great gust of cold air rushed outward, carrying with it the scent of incense, wax, and something metallic, like old coins or blood. Mrs. Drake nudged her forward, then remained behind as the doors closed, sealing Eliza in darkness, broken only by the glow of hundreds of black candles lining a central aisle. On either side, shadowy figures stood in tiered rows, their faces obscured beneath hooded cloaks similar to her own. At the far end, upon a raised dais, stood Lord Wintervale Sr., now dressed in elaborate ceremonial robes of deep purple embroidered with silver. Beside him was her father, looking small and ordinary by comparison, his face flushed with excitement or fear. Eliza couldn't tell which. And between them stood Cassius, resplendent in black brocade, his pale face solemn as he watched her enter. No music accompanied her procession, only the whispered rustling of cloaks as the assembled guests turned to observe her slow walk down the aisle. The chapel itself was unlike any house of worship Eliza had ever seen. No crosses adorned the walls, no saints gazed down from stained glass windows. Instead, the vaulted ceiling depicted a night sky, where constellations she didn't recognize twisted into arcane patterns. The altar was a slab of black marble veined with red, upon which rested a silver chalice and a ceremonial dagger. As she reached the dais, Cassius stepped forward to take her hand. His touch was cool but reassuring, his violet eyes meeting hers with an intensity that conveyed volumes in silence. "I am with you," they seemed to say. Lord Wintervale began to speak in a language Eliza didn't recognize, something ancient, with harsh consonants and flowing vowels that seemed to echo around the chapel as if the very stones were responding. After several minutes of this incantation, he switched to English. "For 8 centuries, the Wintervale line has renewed itself through the sacred union of darkness and light. Tonight, we welcome Eliza Blackwood into our ancient covenant." He gestured to her father, who stepped forward awkwardly and fumbled through his assigned words. "I, James Blackwood, offer my daughter's hand, her blood, and her loyalty to the House of Wintervale, that the alliance between our families may be sealed for 7 generations. Something about the phrasing sent a chill through Eliza. Not just her hand in marriage, but her blood and loyalty, and for a specific duration. This was indeed more contract than wedding. Lord Wintervale took the dagger from the altar. "Remove your cloak and step forward, Eliza Blackwood." Cassius helped her unfasten the heavy garment, his fingers brushing against her neck as he did so. "Courage," he whispered, so softly she barely heard it. Stepping forward, Eliza fought to keep her breathing steady. The elder Wintervale towered over her, his ancient eyes assessing her with the cool calculation of a collector examining a rare specimen. "Do you come willingly to join your blood with ours, to bind your fate to the House of Wintervale, until the 7th generation has passed?" Eliza swallowed hard. "I come of my own will," she replied, the lie bitter on her tongue. "Then extend your hand." She offered her right hand, palm up. Lord Wintervale touched the dagger's tip to her palm, but did not cut. Instead, he began another incantation, this time in what sounded like Latin, though unlike any church Latin she had studied. The assembled guests joined in a rhythmic chant that seemed to make the air vibrate. Eliza felt a strange pressure building in the room, as if the atmosphere itself was condensing around them. The ruby pin hidden in her hair grew warm against her scalp. Lord Wintervale completed his recitation and looked to Cassius. "Son of my blood, speak your claim." Cassius's voice rang clear in the chapel. "I, Cassius Wintervale, heir to the ancient covenant, claim this woman as my bride in blood and bond. Through her our line shall continue, through her our power shall renew." "And what offering do you make to seal this claim?" his father demanded. "My protection, my knowledge, and my fidelity until death or the 7th generation, whichever comes last." Lord Wintervale nodded, satisfied, and raised the dagger again. Blood calls to blood. Life binds to life. This time he did cut. A swift, shallow slice across Eliza's palm. She gasped at the sudden sting, watching as crimson welled from the wound. "When the chalice comes, accept it with your left hand." Lord Wintervale held the silver chalice beneath her bleeding palm, collecting several drops. "The bride's offering," he announced. Next he turned to Cassius, who extended his own hand without hesitation. Another quick cut, deeper than hers, and Cassius's blood flowed into the chalice, darker than human blood, almost black in the candlelight. "The groom's pledge," Lord Wintervale intoned. To Eliza's shock, her father was next, contributing his blood with nervous determination. The father's consent. Finally, Lord Wintervale cut his own palm, adding his ancient blood to the mixture. The covenant's blessing. He swirled the chalice, mixing the 4 bloodlines, then raised it high. What is joined in blood cannot be sundered by mortal hands. What is promised in blood cannot be broken by mortal will. The chanting from the assembled guests grew louder, more insistent. Eliza felt dizzy, the air around her seeming to pulse with each syllable. The ruby pin burned against her skin, and she fought the urge to touch it. Lord Wintervale held the chalice out to her. "Drink, Eliza Blackwood, and become Eliza Wintervale. Drink, and seal your fate with ours for 7 generations. Accept it with your left hand. Drink only after I have spoken the 3rd verse." She reached out with her left hand, taking the heavy chalice. The blood inside looked almost alive, swirling of its own accord. She raised it to her lips but did not drink, waiting. Cassius began to recite, "Blood of my blood, life of my life, soul meets soul, as husband meets wife." The guests echoed the verse, their voices harmonizing unnaturally. The pressure in the room intensified, making Eliza's ears pop. Darkness to light, ancient to new, powers combined when 2 become true. Again the echo, louder now, vibrating through her bones. The liquid in the chalice bubbled slightly, and Eliza thought she saw tiny sparks of silver dancing across its surface. "By this sacred drinking, by this blood-sworn oath, we bind our fates together, one life from us both." As the 3rd verse ended, Eliza tipped the chalice and let the blood touch her lips. It burned like fire and ice simultaneously, spreading through her body in an instant. The world seemed to fracture around her, images overlapping, time slowing, then speeding up. She saw Cassius not as he stood before her now, but in 100 different times and places, riding a horse across a medieval battlefield, standing in a Renaissance court, walking through London streets as buildings crumbled during the Blitz. Always the same face, the same violet eyes, witnessing centuries pass like seasons. And woven through these visions, a growing darkness, Lord Wintervale Sr., using each generation of brides to fuel blood rituals of increasing power, binding the loyalty of kings and prime ministers, consuming the very essence of his daughters-in-law until they were mere shells. Eliza swayed on her feet, the chalice slipping from her fingers. Cassius caught it before it could spill, his free arm steadying her. "It is done!" Lord Wintervale announced triumphantly. The covenant is renewed. Behold the new Lady Wintervale. The hooded guests erupted in sounds that might have been cheers or snarls. Eliza couldn't tell, her senses still reeling from whatever she had just experienced. Her father was beaming, oblivious to the true nature of what he had participated in. Cassius's arm tightened around her waist. "Breathe," he whispered. "It will pass." Lord Wintervale raised his hands for silence. "The binding is complete, but the union must be consecrated. Take her to the Eastern Tower, my son, and complete what we have begun here." A murmur of anticipation rippled through the assembly. Eliza's father looked uncomfortable but said nothing, already relegated to the role of outsider, now that his purpose had been fulfilled. "As tradition demands," Cassius replied, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Come, wife." He led her from the dais, back down the aisle between the hooded figures. Some reached out as she passed, fingers brushing her gown with disturbing reverence. Others whispered words in that same ancient language, their voices dry as autumn leaves. As they reached the ebony doors, they swung open to reveal Mrs. Drake waiting with a different cloak, this one white with silver embroidery. She draped it around Eliza's shoulders, her expression impossible to read. "The Eastern Tower is prepared, my lord," she told Cassius. "The traditional observers are already in position." "Observers?" Eliza managed to ask, still disoriented from the blood ritual. "A formality," Cassius assured her, though his eyes conveyed a different message. "Mrs. Drake, ensure that we are not disturbed after the first hour. My bride will need rest after her journey and the ceremony." "Of course, my lord." Mrs. Drake bowed and stepped aside. Cassius guided Eliza through more winding corridors and up a spiral staircase that seemed to stretch impossibly high. With each step, the ruby pin in her hair pulsed warmer, then cooler, as if responding to unseen energies in the castle. "What happened down there?" Eliza whispered when she was certain they were alone. "I saw visions. The blood carries memories," he replied quietly. "You glimpsed fragments of my past, perhaps even whispers of the future. It affects everyone differently. Your father, the bride's before me." "Not here," Cassius cautioned, glancing upward. "The walls have ears, quite literally in some cases." They reached a landing where two more hooded figures stood guard before a silver door engraved with intricate runes. They bowed to Cassius and opened the door without speaking. Beyond lay a circular chamber dominated by an enormous four-poster bed draped in white silks. Candles burned in silver sconces around the perimeter, and a large window overlooked the moonlit forests surrounding the castle. Eliza also noticed, with growing horror, small galleries on either side of the room, where shadowy figures sat watching in silence. "The traditional observers," Cassius explained under his breath. "Ancient vampires who verify the consummation of Wintervale marriages." "They watch?" Eliza couldn't finish the sentence, mortification flooding her. "They observe only the beginning," he said. "Once the union is initiated, they will withdraw. It is an ancient custom I cannot circumvent without raising suspicions." He led her to the center of the room, then raised his voice for the benefit of their audience. "Leave us. I will summon you when it is time to witness." The hooded figures withdrew to the shadowed galleries, still visible, but giving them a small measure of privacy. Cassius guided Eliza to sit on the edge of the bed, then knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Listen carefully," he whispered, his lips barely moving. "Everything has changed. The blood ritual was not what my father intended." "What do you mean?" "Your ruby pin. It did more than shield your mind. It altered the ritual itself." His violet eyes burned with an intensity that both frightened and fascinated her. "Instead of binding you to my father's will, it bound you directly to me, and me to you. An equal partnership, not the subjugation he planned." Eliza's mind raced. "The visions were real. My father has used this ritual for centuries to create a network of influence extending to the highest levels of government. Each bride's essence has been slowly drained to fuel his power." Cassius's hands tightened on hers. I've tried to stop him before, but never had the means until now. What happens next? She asked, acutely aware of the watchers in the shadows. We must convince them the marriage has been consummated, then implement the next phase of our plan. He stood, raising his voice again. Come, witnesses, observe as tradition demands, then leave us to our privacy. The hooded figures glided forward from the shadows, arranging themselves at the foot of the bed. Cassius leaned in close to Eliza, his lips near her ear. Trust me, he whispered, and forgive me for what comes next. With his words still warming her ear, Cassius moved with inhuman swiftness. In one fluid motion, he tilted Eliza's head back and lowered his mouth to her throat. She gasped, feeling the sharp graze of fangs against her skin, not breaking the surface, but creating a convincing illusion for their audience. His body shielded hers from direct view as he whispered against her neck, "Make sounds of passion. They must believe this is real." Understanding dawned, and Eliza let out a breathless moan that was not entirely feigned. The proximity of his lips to her pulse point sent unexpected shivers through her body. She clutched at his shoulders, playing her role as the willing bride while her mind raced. Cassius's hands moved to the intricate fastenings of her wedding gown, loosening them enough for the watchers to believe he was undressing her. Though he carefully preserved her modesty, the fabric rustled convincingly as he manipulated it, creating shadows and movements that suggested far more was happening. "They're looking for blood," he breathed against her collarbone. "The consummation must be marked by it." Before she could question his meaning, he bit into his own tongue. When he kissed her neck next, she felt the warm wetness of his blood staining her skin. The metallic scent filled her nostrils, and from the galleries came sounds of approval, soft hisses and sighs that raised the hair on her arms. The charade continued for several excruciating minutes, their staged intimacy a strange dance of suggestion and restraint. Eliza followed Cassius's lead, responding to his cues with increasingly convincing sounds of pleasure, while he strategically placed smears of his blood on the sheets and her skin. Finally, he raised his head and addressed the witnesses. "It is done. Leave us now." The hooded figures retreated reluctantly, their movements accompanied by rustling whispers. The silver door closed behind them with a definitive click, and Eliza sagged with relief. Cassius immediately moved away, giving her space. "Forgive the theatrics," he said, offering a handkerchief for the blood on her neck. "They would not have left without evidence of both consummation and feeding." Eliza pressed the cloth to her throat, her heartbeat gradually slowing. "Your father will know we've deceived them?" "Not immediately." Cassius moved to a concealed panel in the wall, revealing a small wash basin. He wet a cloth and returned to her. "The blood bond we formed in the ceremony is real, but different from what he intended. He'll sense something has changed, but won't understand what until it's too late." She allowed him to gently clean the blood from her skin. "What exactly did the ritual do? I still don't understand." "My father designed the blood ceremony to create a hierarchical bond, he at the apex, controlling me, and through me, controlling you and any children we might have." Cassius's expression darkened. Each Wintervale bride becomes a vessel for power that he siphons. Over decades they wither from within, while appearing to age normally to outside observers. Eliza shuddered. "And now? Your talisman disrupted the hierarchy. Instead of a pyramid with my father at its peak, we created a circle. You and I connected directly, each maintaining our autonomy." He set aside the bloodied cloth. "It's unprecedented. In 8 centuries of Wintervale marriages, no bride has ever worn such protection during the ceremony. But where did the talisman come from? How did you obtain it?" A shadow crossed his face. "That is a longer story, for a safer time. For now, know that I've spent decades preparing for this moment, a chance to break my father's power without destroying the Wintervale line completely." Eliza stood, moving to the large window. Below, she could see figures moving through the gardens, wedding guests departing, or perhaps assembling for some other nocturnal purpose. In the distance, Light still burned in the chapel windows. "My father," she said suddenly. "Is he in danger?" "Not if he leaves at dawn as planned." Cassius joined her at the window. "Your father has served his purpose in my father's eyes. He'll receive his political appointment, unaware of the invisible strings now attached to him. My father prefers his pawns to believe they've made advantageous bargains." A troubling thought occurred to Eliza. "The blood I drank, will it change me?" "Not in the way you fear. You won't become vampire." His violet eyes met hers steadily. "But it has created a connection between us. You may sense my emotions at times, perhaps even glimpse my thoughts if they're strong enough. I will experience the same with you." "Is that happening now?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "No. The ruby prevents it unless we both consciously desire the connection." He hesitated. "However, there is something we must do before morning to cement our advantage." "What?" "Feed from you. Properly this time." He raised a hand to forestall her alarm. "A small amount only, but it must be real. The blood-mixing ceremony created potential, but a direct exchange will solidify our bond and mask what we've done from my father." Eliza's hand rose instinctively to her throat. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. I understand your hesitation." His voice was gentle. "But without this step, my father will sense the disruption in the ritual by morning. We would lose our only advantage." She studied him, searching for deception and finding only urgency tinged with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Will it hurt?" "Momentarily. I can make it painless after the initial puncture, and you'll take only what's necessary." "Nothing more?" "You have my word." He extended his hand, palm up. "Your choice, Eliza. I won't force you." The moment stretched between them, fraught with implications. Finally, Eliza placed her hand in his. "How should we proceed?" Relief flickered across his features. "Sit comfortably. It will only take a moment." She settled on a chaise near the fire, her heart racing. Cassius knelt beside her, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. "May I?" he asked, reaching for her wrist rather than her neck. Surprised by this choice, she nodded and extended her arm. He cradled her hand in both of his touch cool but not unpleasant. His thumbs stroked gently over her pulse point, a soothing rhythm that gradually calmed her racing heart. "The wrist contains memories of action. What you've written, created, built," he explained softly. "The neck holds emotions, dreams, fears. For our purpose, the wrist is better." His eyes met hers one last time, seeking final confirmation. When she nodded again, he lowered his mouth to her inner wrist. The sharp sting of his fangs penetrating her skin made her gasp, but the pain immediately transformed into an unexpected sensation. A warm current flowing between them, carrying fragments of thoughts and feelings not her own. She glimpsed Cassius as a child centuries ago, learning to control his thirst under his father's merciless tutelage. She felt his centuries of carefully concealed rebellion, his search for a way to end his father's tyranny without destroying their entire lineage. Most surprisingly, she sensed his genuine respect for her intellect and determination, qualities he had recognized from their first meeting. The experience lasted less than a minute before he gently withdrew, pressing his thumb to the puncture wounds to stop the bleeding. Eliza felt lightheaded, but not weakened, and strangely energized, as if some dormant part of her had awakened. "Are you all right?" Cassius asked, studying her face intently. "Yes, I think so." She examined her wrist, finding only 2 tiny marks already beginning to heal. "I saw fragments of your past, and I glimpsed yours." His expression softened. "Your mother's death when you were 12, your secret studies while your father thought you were practicing needlework, your first rejected manuscript." Eliza flushed. "So you know everything about me now?" "Hardly. Just impressions, significant moments." He released her wrist. "The connection will settle over time, becoming less intrusive. The ruby gives you control over what you share." A clock somewhere in the castle struck 2. its deep chimes reverberating through the stone walls. "We should rest," Cassius said. "Dawn brings new challenges. My father will expect to see us at breakfast, a tradition where the new bride is formally introduced to the household." "Including the servants with empty eyes?" Eliza asked, recalling the footman who had greeted her arrival. "The bound," Cassius confirmed grimly. "Humans who have surrendered their will entirely to my father through repeated feedings. Some were criminals sentenced to death, others debtors or desperate souls who chose servitude over suffering. They're one of many practices I intend to end." He moved to a concealed door partially hidden by tapestry. "These are my private chambers. You may sleep there undisturbed. I'll remain here in case we have unexpected visitors." Eliza hesitated. "Your plan. When do we begin?" "It's already begun." He gestured to her wrist. The blood exchange completed the first phase. Now we must move carefully, following the traditional routines while secretly accessing what we need from the library, which is the Wintervale Grimoire. His voice dropped lower. "The original Bloodspell book containing my father's rituals and their counters. He believes it's securely hidden, but I discovered its location decades ago, waiting for the right moment and the right ally to retrieve it." Exhaustion suddenly washed over Eliza, the cumulative effect of travel, emotional strain and blood loss making her sway slightly on her feet. Cassius was instantly at her side, his arm supporting her elbow. "Rest now," he said. "We'll speak more when you've recovered your strength." She allowed him to guide her through the hidden door into a surprisingly austere chamber. Unlike the opulent wedding suite, Cassius's personal quarters contained simple furnishings: a desk covered in books and papers, shelves lined with volumes in various languages, and a modestly sized bed with plain linens. "It's not what I expected," she admitted. "The Wintervales maintain appearances where others can see," he replied. "In private, I prefer practicality to ostentation." As he turned to leave, Eliza caught his sleeve. "Why me? Of all the potential brides your father might have chosen, why did you select me for this alliance?" Cassius studied her for a long moment. "Because you had the most to lose and the courage to fight for it. I needed someone who wouldn't surrender to comfort and privilege, someone who valued freedom above security. How could you know that about me before we met?" "I didn't meet you for the first time in your father's house," he admitted. "I observed you for months before that. At the women's lecture series you attended in disguise, in the reading room of the London Library where you researched forgotten female scholars, at the suffragist meeting where you delivered an anonymous speech that inspired 2 members of Parliament to change their votes." Eliza stared at him in shock. "You were there? At all those places?" "Vampires move easily through human society when we choose to." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "Your intelligence and determination made you the perfect partner for what must be done." Before she could respond, he bowed slightly and withdrew, leaving her alone with this new understanding of how deliberately she had been chosen. Not for her bloodline or her beauty, but for her mind and spirit, a selection based on qualities her father had always dismissed as worthless in a woman. Sleep came surprisingly easily, despite the strange surroundings and extraordinary events of the day. Eliza dreamed of libraries with endless shelves, of ancient books whose text shifted under her gaze, and of a massive tree whose roots and branches formed a complex web connecting distant points of light. She awoke to gentle knocking and Martha's familiar voice. "Miss Eliza, Lord Cassius asked me to help you prepare for breakfast." Disoriented momentarily, Eliza sat up in the unfamiliar bed, memories of the previous night flooding back. "Come in, Martha." The maid entered, carrying a tray with tea and a small silver bell. Her eyes widened as she took in Eliza's appearance and the modest chamber. "Are you well, miss? Did he—" She stopped, unable to complete the question. "I'm perfectly fine, Martha." Eliza accepted the tea gratefully. "Lord Cassius has been considerate." Relief washed over Martha's face. "I've brought your blue morning dress as you packed it." "Mrs. Drake suggested something more formal, but I thought you might prefer your own choice today. As Martha helped her dress, Eliza noticed her wrist where Cassius had fed. The puncture marks had faded to tiny pink crescents, barely visible against her skin. She touched them lightly, feeling a phantom echo of the connection they had shared. "The household is in quite a state this morning," Martha reported as she arranged Eliza's hair in a simpler style than the previous day's elaborate coiffure. "Visitors departing, others arriving, and there's talk below stairs about preparations for some ritual called the Ascension happening 3 days hence." Eliza stilled. "Did you hear any details?" "Only that it requires the new Lady Wintervale's participation, and that Lord Wintervale has been planning it for decades." Martha secured a final hairpin. "One of the kitchen maids, one of the normal ones with proper eyes, says the old lord has hardly slept, working on preparations in the North Tower." The ruby pin was still woven securely in Eliza's hair, concealed beneath artfully arranged curls. She touched it through the strands, taking comfort in its presence. "There," Martha declared, stepping back to assess her work. "You look beautiful, miss, my lady. Please, when we're alone, I'm still just Eliza." She squeezed Martha's hand. "You're my one true ally here." "Not your only ally," came Cassius's voice from the doorway. He stood there in a dark suit, his hair tied back neatly, looking every inch the aristocratic heir. Only his unusual violet eyes hinted at his supernatural nature. "Good morning, Lord Cassius." Martha curtsied deeply. "You may rise," he said, his tone gentler than most nobles addressing servants. "Thank you for attending to my wife. I would speak with her privately now." Martha exited quickly, leaving them alone. As soon as the door closed, Cassius's formal demeanor softened. "You slept well?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Surprisingly, yes." Eliza adjusted her sleeve, unconsciously covering her wrist. "Martha mentioned something called the Ascension happening in 3 days. Is this part of your father's plan?" Cassius's expression darkened. "It's worse than I feared. The Ascension is a ritual he performs only once a century, a mass feeding that renews his powers exponentially. If he's scheduling it now, he intends to use our marriage bond as its centerpiece. What would that mean for me? It would drain you completely, leaving just enough life to bear an heir before your mind and spirit withered entirely." His hands clenched at his sides. "This changes our timeline. We must find the grimoire today, not gradually as I'd planned." Fear coiled in Eliza's stomach. "How? Won't your father be watching us?" "After breakfast, he'll meet with the coven elders who remained after the wedding. We'll have perhaps 2 hours while he's occupied." Cassius moved closer, lowering his voice though they were alone. "The grimoire is hidden in the library, behind a false panel accessible only by blood, specifically the blood of a Wintervale and their bound mate. So we needed to complete the bond before we could retrieve it," Eliza realized. "Yes. Without last night's exchange, the panel would remain sealed to us." He offered his arm formally, preparing to escort her to breakfast. "At the table, follow my lead. Speak little, eat what you can, and show appropriate deference to my father. Everything must appear normal until we make our move." As they walked through the castle's corridors, Eliza became increasingly aware of eyes watching from shadows, not just servants, but things that moved too quickly for clear sight, leaving only impressions of presence. The ancient structure seemed alive with malevolent awareness. "The castle itself is partially sentient," Cassius explained quietly, noticing her unease. "Centuries of blood magic have seeped into its stones. It reports to my father but cannot understand intent or complex thoughts, only movements and basic emotions." They descended the grand staircase to the main floor, where Mrs. Drake awaited them. "The Lord Wintervale expects you in the morning room," she informed them with a formal bow. As they followed her through a maze of corridors, Eliza mentally prepared herself for the performance ahead. Her life, and apparently Cassius's centuries-long plan to end his father's tyranny, depended on her ability to conceal her true thoughts for just a few crucial hours. The morning room doors opened to reveal a scene of deceptive normality. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, overlooking the formal gardens, illuminating a table set for breakfast with fine china and silver. Lord Wintervale sat at its head, reading what appeared to be a newspaper, while her father occupied a seat to his right, buttering toast with apparent contentment. Both men looked up as they entered, and Eliza immediately noticed something different about her father. His eyes seemed slightly glazed, his movements a fraction too slow, as if he were mildly intoxicated. A small bandage adorned his wrist, evidence, she suspected, of Lord Wintervale's influence already taking hold. "Ah, the newlyweds," Lord Wintervale greeted them, setting aside his paper. His violet eyes, so similar to his son's yet lacking any warmth, assessed Eliza with clinical interest. "Come, daughter, sit beside me. Tell me how you find your new home." The morning light through the stained glass windows cast prismatic patterns across the breakfast table, painting Lord Wintervale's aristocratic features in alternating bands of gold and shadow. As Eliza took the seat beside him, she felt his power like a physical presence, ancient and cold, pressing against her mind with gentle but insistent force. "Wintervale Castle is magnificent, my lord," she answered, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Unlike anything I've ever seen. It has stood for 8 centuries, he replied, his voice like velvet over steel, built on foundations, older still. The very earth beneath us is saturated with power." His fingers brushed her wrist where Cassius had fed, the touch sending an involuntary shiver through her. "I see my son has performed his husbandly duties." "Good. The bloodline must continue." Cassius took his seat across from her, his face revealing nothing. "Eliza will make a fitting Lady Wintervale, father." "Indeed." Lord Wintervale signalled to a servant who poured dark red liquid into his goblet. "Not wine," Eliza realized with a jolt. "James, you've done well providing such a spirited daughter. Her bloodline may lack our antiquity, but it possesses certain qualities I find promising." Her father beamed at the compliment, seemingly oblivious to its predatory undertones. "The Blackwoods have always produced strong stock, my lord. Eliza's mother was renowned for her vitality before her untimely passing." "Yes, I recall Marianne Blackwood," Lord Wintervale mused, studying Eliza over the rim of his goblet. "She attended the Havisham summer ball in '72, quite captivating. Her bloodline had interesting resilience." Eliza froze, fork suspended above her plate. Her mother had never mentioned meeting the Wintervales. What else had been hidden from her? "You remember my mother?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity despite Cassius's warning to speak little. Lord Wintervale's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I remember everyone of consequence, my dear. Vampiric memory is both blessing and curse. Nothing fades, nothing is forgotten." His gaze sharpened. "Your mother caught my interest, but circumstances prevented me from pursuing it further." An image flashed in Eliza's mind. Not her own memory, but something transmitted through the blood bond with Cassius. Lord Wintervale approaching her mother at that long-ago ball, being firmly rebuffed, the fury in his eyes at the rejection. Cassius was sharing information, warning her. "How fortunate that our families have finally united," Eliza managed, lowering her eyes submissively. "Indeed, the Ascension ceremony will be all the more powerful for it." Lord Wintervale turned to her father. "James, you'll be departing after breakfast as planned? Your new position at Parliament awaits, I believe." "Yes, though I'm loath to leave without seeing Eliza properly settled," her father replied, that strange glaze still evident in his eyes. "She is a Wintervale now," the vampire lord stated with finality. "Her place is here with us. The carriage is already prepared for your journey." Understanding washed over Eliza. Her father was being dismissed, sent away before he could witness what would happen to his daughter. Despite his willingness to trade her for political advancement, a surge of panic rose at the thought of losing this last connection to her former life. "Father," she said quickly, "perhaps you could stay until—" "Nonsense, Eliza. James Blackwood interrupted, his tone unnaturally placid. "Lord Wintervale has been most generous. I must return to London immediately to attend to my new responsibilities." He touched the bandage on his wrist absently. "We'll correspond, of course." Cassius cleared his throat. "Father, I thought I might show Eliza the library this morning. She's quite the scholar, and our collection would surely fascinate her." "A scholar?" Lord Wintervale arched an eyebrow, amusement playing across his features. "How modern of you, my dear. By all means, Cassius, indulge your bride's intellectual pretensions for now." His emphasis made clear how temporary he considered such indulgences. "I have matters to discuss with the elders until noon. After that, Eliza and I must begin preparations for the ascension." "Of course, father," Cassius replied with perfect deference. "We'll ensure she's properly prepared." The remainder of breakfast passed in carefully maintained pleasantries. When they finished, Lord Wintervale rose first. "James, walk with me to your carriage. There are certain matters I wish to impress upon you before your departure." He turned to Eliza. "Say your farewells, daughter. You'll see your father again at the appropriate time." Understanding this might be her last opportunity, Eliza embraced her father tightly. "Be careful in London," she whispered. "Trust no one sent by the Wintervales." A flicker of confusion passed through his eyes, briefly clearing the glaze. "Eliza, what do you—" "Come, James," Lord Wintervale interrupted smoothly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The journey to London is long." As they left, the momentary clarity in her father's expression faded, replaced once more by that unsettling docility. Eliza fought back tears, recognizing she might never see him as himself again. Once they were alone, Cassius gripped her hand. "We have limited time. The library now." They moved swiftly through the castle's labyrinthine corridors, passing portraits of Wintervales through the centuries, each generation's patriarch bearing the same violet eyes, each surrounded by wives whose faces grew progressively more hollow and empty with age. "Your mother," Cassius said quietly as they walked, "was the only woman who ever refused my father outright." He never forgot it. When he learned James Blackwood had a daughter of marriageable age, he recognized the opportunity for a particularly satisfying revenge. "He's been planning this for years," Eliza realized, horror dawning. "The political appointment, everything. It was all to obtain me specifically." "Yes, which makes our counter-plan all the more satisfying." They reached an ornate door, carved with scenes of ancient knowledge-seekers. "Here we are. The Wintervale Library, the true heart of my father's power." The library was a vast circular chamber rising 3 stories, every wall lined with books, manuscripts, and scrolls. A domed ceiling painted with constellations capped the space, while spiraling staircases led to elevated walkways accessing the higher shelves. At the center stood a massive globe that appeared to be crafted from some dark metal, its surface etched with continents that matched no earthly geography. "The cartography of realms," Cassius explained, following her gaze. "A map of worlds adjacent to our own, where my father's influence extends. But we haven't time for explanations now." He led her to a section of shelving near the rear of the library, where ancient volumes, bound in materials Eliza preferred not to identify, sat in glass cases. Checking that they were truly alone, Cassius pressed his palm against an unremarkable panel between 2 cases. "Place your hand beside mine," he instructed. "The blood bond we share will activate the mechanism." Eliza complied, her smaller hand pale against the dark wood. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she felt a sharp sting as the wood seemed to grow needles that pricked her palm, drawing blood. Cassius experienced the same, his expression unchanging despite the pain. The panel slid sideways, revealing a small alcove containing a single book resting on a pedestal of carved bone. The tome was massive, bound in what appeared to be blackened skin, with locks of silver holding it closed. "The grimoire," Cassius whispered, reverence and revulsion mingling in his voice. 8 centuries of Wintervale blood magic, including the original spell my ancestor used to become vampire, and the counter spells to undo what has been done. How do we open it? With blood freely given by one who seeks to heal rather than harm. He withdrew a small silver knife from his pocket. This will be the third time I've taken your blood in 24 hours. I wouldn't ask if there were any alternative. I understand. Eliza extended her hand without hesitation. The stakes were too high for reluctance now. Cassius made a small cut across her palm, then repeated the process on his own. Together, they pressed their bleeding hands to the book's cover. The silver locks snapped open with an audible click, and the cover lifted of its own accord. Pages began turning rapidly, as if blown by an unfelt wind, stopping finally at an elaborate diagram inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift and move as Eliza stared at them. At the center of the diagram was an illustration of a chalice surrounded by 13 figures, with lines of power flowing from them into a central figure elevated above the others. "The Ascension Ritual," Cassius confirmed, scanning the ancient text. "As I feared, it requires the complete draining of 13 vessels, with the newest Wintervale bride as the central conduit." His finger traced the lines of text. "Once completed, it would grant my father near immortality and the power to control minds across continents without direct blood contact. And I would die," Eliza stated flatly. "Yes, after being used to amplify his power exponentially." Cassius continued turning pages until he found what he sought. Here, the countering ritual. Designed originally as a safeguard, should a Wintervale lord ever become corrupt beyond redemption. Eliza studied the complex instructions. "This requires preparation. Ingredients I don't recognize, incantations in languages I can't read." "I've spent decades gathering what we need," Cassius replied. "Everything is hidden in my chambers, waiting for this moment." He withdrew a small leather-bound journal from inside his coat and began rapidly copying the essential elements of the counterspell. A soft chiming sounded through the library, a warning. Cassius's head snapped up. "Someone's coming! We must replace the book." He quickly finished his notes, then closed the grimoire, returning it to its pedestal as the locks automatically re-engaged. They had barely closed the hidden panel when Mrs. Drake appeared between the stacks, her face carefully neutral. "Lord Wintervale has concluded his meetings early. He requests Lady Wintervale's presence in the North Tower immediately." Alarm flashed through Cassius's eyes, visible only to Eliza. "Father knows my bride needs rest after last night's festivities. Surely this can wait until this afternoon." "I'm afraid he was most insistent, my lord." Mrs. Drake's gaze flicked meaningfully to a shadowed corner where something shifted, one of the castle's supernatural watchers. "He said preparation for the ascension cannot be delayed." Cassius's hand found Eliza's, squeezing once in silent communication. "Very well. I shall accompany my wife." "Lord Wintervale specified she come alone," Mrs. Drake countered, regret evident beneath her formal tone. Panic threatened to overwhelm Eliza, but she forced it down. They had known this moment might come, had prepared for it, even if not so soon. The ruby pin still nestled in her hair, and the blood bond with Cassius hummed beneath her skin. She was not powerless. "It's all right," she told Cassius, meeting his eyes steadily. "I should become acquainted with my father-in-law's customs. I'll join him now." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "As you wish, my dear. I shall see you at luncheon, then." Through their bond, she felt his true message. "Be careful. I'll come for you. Remember your protection." Mrs. Drake led her through corridors that grew increasingly cold and dark, eventually reaching a spiral staircase that wound upward into one of the castle's tallest towers. As they climbed, Eliza became aware of a low, humming vibration in the very stones, growing stronger with each step. "Mrs. Drake," she ventured, "you've served the Wintervales long, nearly 40 years, my lady. Yet you're not like the others. Not one of the bound." The housekeeper paused momentarily on the stairs. "I serve willingly, but with conditions. Lord Wintervale respects those boundaries because my particular talents are useful to him." "What talents?" A ghost of a smile crossed the woman's stern features. "I see things others cannot. Patterns, possibilities, potential futures. It's why I was chosen to attend you specifically." They had reached a landing with a single iron-bound door. Mrs. Drake stopped, turning to face Eliza directly. "He believes you are unprepared, unaware," she said quietly. "This is your advantage. The ruby you wear, it was mine once, many years ago." She touched Eliza's hair briefly where the pin lay hidden. "Use it well, Lady Wintervale. Some chains can be broken only from within." Before Eliza could respond, Mrs. Drake knocked on the door, which swung open to reveal Lord Wintervale, standing before an elaborate altar covered with arcane instruments, ancient texts, and vessels containing substances that pulsed with unnatural light. "Leave us," he commanded Mrs. Drake, who bowed and retreated down the stairs. Alone with her father-in-law, Eliza felt the full weight of his presence, a crushing pressure of accumulated centuries and power that made breathing difficult. She curtsied deeply, playing the role of dutiful bride. "You wished to see me, my lord. Come closer, daughter." His voice was deceptively gentle. "I must assess your suitability for the Ascension ritual. It requires certain qualities that not all possess." As she approached, she noticed the altar contained 13 silver chalices arranged in a circle, with a larger golden cup at the center. Each was filled with what appeared to be blood in varying shades, from bright crimson to nearly black. "Your blood now carries my son's essence," Lord Wintervale continued, gesturing for her to sit on a stone bench beside the altar. "But it requires enhancement before the ritual. A simple process, nothing to fear." He selected a crystal vial containing iridescent liquid and removed the stopper. "Drink this. It will prepare your system for what comes next." Eliza took the vial, pretending to raise it to her lips while surreptitiously pressing the hidden release on her bracelet, another of Cassius's protective gifts. A tiny amount of clear liquid dropped from the bracelet into the vial, neutralizing whatever potion it contained without changing its appearance. "All of it, my dear," Lord Wintervale instructed, watching her intently. She drank, feigning a shudder and slight disorientation afterward. "It tastes strange." Satisfaction crossed his features. "The sensation will pass. Now your hand, if you please." He took her wrist, turning it to examine the fading marks from Cassius's feeding. His cold fingers traced the punctures, and Eliza felt a probing pressure in her mind. Subtle, insidious, seeking entry through the blood connection. The ruby pin warmed against her scalp, its protective magic holding firm against his intrusion. She allowed her eyes to glaze slightly, pretending susceptibility, while her mind remained her own. "Interesting," Lord Wintervale murmured. "You resist instinctively, even without training. Your mother had similar strength." His grip tightened painfully. "It makes the breaking all the more satisfying." "Breaking, my lord?" she asked, her voice deliberately faint. "The Ascension requires a vessel who can channel immense power before being consumed by it. Willful minds make the best conduits, once properly subdued." He released her wrist and turned to select a silver knife from the altar. "I had intended to begin the preparation gradually, but your unexpected resilience suggests we should advance more quickly." Fear spiked through Eliza as she realized his intentions, but before she could respond, the tower door burst open. Cassius stood in the doorway, his normally composed features tight with controlled rage. "Father, forgive the interruption, but there's an urgent matter requiring your attention. The Elder Council has received disturbing news from our European branches." Lord Wintervale's eyes narrowed. "This is most inconvenient, Cassius. I've only just begun Lady Eliza's preparation. The news concerns the Ascension directly, a potential disruption to the celestial alignment we require." Cassius maintained a deferential posture despite the challenge in his words. "The elders await you in the ritual chamber. They were most insistent." For a tense moment, Lord Wintervale seemed poised to refuse. Then, with obvious reluctance, he set down the knife. "Very well, Lady Eliza, remain here. I shall return shortly to continue your preparation." As he swept from the room, he cast a suspicious glance between them. The door closed behind him with an ominous thud. "We have minutes at most," Cassius said urgently, rushing to Eliza's side. "The elders will quickly realize I fabricated the emergency." "The grimoire. Did you copy enough?" she asked, rising shakily from the bench. "Yes, everything we need for the counter-ritual." He examined the altar grimly. "He's further along in preparations than I feared. The ascension was originally scheduled for the full moon, 3 days hence. He's accelerated his timeline. Because he suspects something," Eliza concluded. "The ruby protected my mind, but he sensed the resistance. Then we must act tonight, not tomorrow as planned." Cassius gathered several items from the altar: a vial of black powder, a small silver bell, and a parchment covered in arcane symbols. "We'll need these. Can you walk? The potion—" "I neutralized it," she assured him. "The bracelet worked exactly as you said it would." Relief flashed across his features. "Clever Eliza. Come, we must reach my chambers before he returns." They hurried down the spiral staircase, Eliza gathering her skirts to move faster. As they reached the main corridor, a thunderous crash echoed through the castle, followed by an inhuman roar of rage. "He's discovered the deception," Cassius said grimly. "Run!" They raced through the castle, no longer concerned with maintaining appearances. Servants scattered before them, while the shadowy watchers in the walls seemed to writhe with agitation, sensing the disruption to their master's plans. They reached Cassius's chambers and barred the door behind them. Martha was already there, white-faced with fear, but steadfastly arranging items on a table as she'd been instructed: candles, herbs, a silver bowl, and various arcane implements. "Everything's ready, my lord," she reported, "just as you specified." "Excellent." Cassius moved to a hidden cabinet, retrieving the journal containing his notes from the grimoire. "Martha, guard the door. Warn us if anyone approaches." As Martha took up her position, Cassius guided Eliza to the center of an intricate pattern drawn on the floor in what appeared to be silver dust. "The counter-ritual must be performed by both of us together. Our blood bond makes this possible. The first and only time a Wintervale bride has entered the ritual as equal rather than sacrifice." The castle shuddered around them, stones groaning as Lord Wintervale's rage manifested physically. Dust sifted from the ceiling, and the temperature plummeted until their breath formed clouds in the air. "He's calling on the castle's power," Cassius explained, working rapidly to arrange the components of the ritual. "We must complete this before he reaches us." Eliza removed the ruby pin from her hair, holding the warm stone in her palm. Mrs. Drake said this was hers once, that some chains can only be broken from within. "Mrs. Drake has played a longer game than even I realized," Cassius replied, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. "The pin, Eliza. It's the final component we need, the catalyst that will direct the counterspell." Together they placed the ruby in the silver bowl, then added the ingredients Cassius had collected: the black powder, herbs, and finally drops of blood from each of them, freely given. As their blood touched the ruby, it began to glow with inner fire, illuminating their faces with crimson light. The castle shook more violently. From the corridor came Martha's frightened voice. "He's coming! Lord Wintervale and the Bound. They're nearly here." Cassius met Eliza's eyes across the glowing bowl. "Once we begin, there's no turning back. If we succeed, my father's power will be broken, and the bloodline's curse with it. If we fail, we won't fail," Eliza said with quiet certainty, taking his hands in hers. "Begin the incantation." Together they recited the words copied from the grimoire. Cassius in perfect ancient pronunciation, Eliza echoing with determined precision. The ruby's glow intensified with each phrase, spreading outward along the silver pattern on the floor. Outside, Lord Wintervale's voice thundered commands, followed by the splintering sound of the outer door being breached. Martha cried out in alarm, then fell silent. The final words of the counter-ritual hung in the air between them as the inner door began to crack under tremendous pressure. Eliza and Cassius spoke them in unison, their blood-joined hands held over the blazing ruby. What was bound in blood shall be unbound. What was taken shall be restored. What was broken shall be made whole. The ruby exploded in a flash of blinding light, just as Lord Wintervale burst through the door, his face contorted with inhuman rage, flanked by vacant-eyed servants. The light engulfed him, spreading outward in a crimson wave that passed through the castle walls and beyond. Where it touched the bound servants, their eyes cleared, awareness returning as the blood thraldom dissolved. Lord Wintervale himself seemed to age centuries in seconds, his immortal power draining away, leaving him mortal for the first time in 800 years. "What have you done?" he gasped, staggering forward before collapsing to his knees. His voice, once commanding, now cracked with sudden frailty. "What should have been done centuries ago, Father?" Cassius answered, still holding Eliza's hands within the protected circle. "The Wintervale blood curse is broken. Your power over others ended." The ancient vampire lord looked at his hands in horror as they withered before his eyes, centuries of unnaturally suspended time catching up in moments. "You've killed me," he whispered. "No," Eliza corrected gently. "We've freed you, and everyone you've bound through blood magic across generations." Around them, the castle itself seemed to sigh, as if relieved of a great burden. The shadows in the corners retreated, and sunlight streamed more brightly through the windows. In the corridor beyond, sounds of confusion and wonder rose as servants and household members awoke from their various states of thraldom. Lord Wintervale's body continued to age rapidly, withering to dust before their eyes until nothing remained but ancient clothing and the silver signet ring that had marked his authority for centuries. Martha rushed to Eliza's side, miraculously unharmed. "It's happening throughout the castle, my lady. Everyone's awakening, even Mrs. Drake is smiling." Cassius stepped out of the ritual circle, lifting the ring that had been his father's. After a moment's contemplation, he placed it on his own finger, where it resized itself to fit perfectly. "The Wintervale line continues," he said quietly, "but transformed. No more blood thraldom, no more sacrificial brides." He turned to Eliza, his violet eyes holding a question. "If you wish to leave now, I would understand. Our arrangement served its purpose." Eliza considered the offer. She was free now, truly free, with no supernatural compulsion binding her to Cassius or Wintervale Castle. She could pursue her education, her writing, her independence as they'd originally planned. Yet as she looked at him, this immortal man who had spent centuries planning his father's downfall rather than succumbing to the same corruption, she recognized something unexpected had grown between them: respect, understanding, and perhaps the seeds of something deeper. "I believe," she said carefully, "that our arrangement has potential beyond its original purpose. Wintervale Castle needs a new kind of lady, one who might transform it from a place of darkness to a center of knowledge and healing." Hope kindled in Cassius's eyes. "And Cambridge? Your manuscripts?" "Cambridge is less than a day's journey from here," she pointed out. "And what better place to write history than in a castle filled with it? Besides," she added with growing confidence, "I believe Lord Wintervale's extensive library should be properly catalogued and made available to scholars. That alone could take years." For the first time since she'd met him, Cassius smiled fully, a genuine expression that transformed his solemn features. Years would be just the beginning, Eliza Wintervale. He extended his hand, and she took it, not as captive bride or reluctant ally, but as equal partner in whatever future they might build from the ashes of 8 centuries of darkness. Outside, the fog that had perpetually shrouded Wintervale Castle began to dissipate, revealing the surrounding countryside bathed in spring sunshine. Within its ancient walls, light reached corners long consigned to shadow, and voices raised in joy echoed where once only silence and fear had dwelled. And in the highest tower, where Lord Wintervale's instruments of power now lay dormant, the final wisp of ruby light faded from the air, its purpose fulfilled, its protection no longer needed in a house where blood magic had given way to something far more powerful: choice.